I think what we have to do is think, who are we making theater for? Who are the people who need the most support, the most energizing, the most to lift up their stories that aren't being told?
Welcome. I'm Kristen Martin, and this is Torches. Today we have the incredible artist activist V, formerly Eve Ensler. I am really excited and honored to speak with her today. Welcome, V.
Thank you, Kristen. So happy to be with you.
It's wonderful. So tell me, how did you come to be in downtown performance at the beginning of your career?
That's such an interesting question because I don't think there was any other place I could have been, right? I don't even know it was a choice, it was, somebody said to me last night at an event we were doing, oh God, they were saying about a new play of mine. It's a lot of people love it, and some people are very nervous about it. And somebody said, "Oh, everything you've ever done," right? And so that kind of sums it up. Like, there isn't anything I've ever done where, particularly before the Vagina Monologues, where I could have imagined it like Midtown or Uptown, because it was addressing issues, it was thinking about situations, it was messing with form, it was looking at political issues and how they intersect with art. And that wasn't happening uptown. It's still not happening uptown. And so I think I just naturally gravitated to where the work would be done.
And I think that with the philosophy that you were working inside of, it felt like a place where you could explore all the range of what you were interested in.
It was
Yeah.
amazing. And I think about this so often now. Like, what do young people do who are radical, who are experimental, who are artists, who are just trying new forms and letting things come out of them the way they're coming out of them, and without trying to fit a form or fit a package or commodify themselves or, look at a marketplace, but just what's pulsing through them. And I feel so grateful that we had downtown, that we had all these amazing little theaters and, black box theaters and here and La Mama and like the wide range of places we had. I don't know I don't know what I would do today. Like, I don't know how I would begin as an artist in New York without having to already fit into some standardized notion of what a play is or what a one person show is or any of that, you know?
Yeah. I think I know this answer already, but could you talk about a particular philosophy or core value that centers your work?
I think I'm really interested in saying the unsayable, of speaking what isn't being said, of saying what's right in front of us usually, but what no one will talk about. It probably comes from living in a house where no one would say, you know, look what's happening in this room. Look, as we're witnessing, no one would be even articulating the witness, and I think I vowed to myself at a young age that I would never allow that to happen again in my life, that I'd always say what was happening. And it's interesting, I was just having a conversation before this with a group of amazing people who wanted to do a large conversation about why the wellness community and the therapeutic community have not spoken out, for example, about Deepak Chopra and what's going on, and why so often, even in the therapeutic communities, we aren't talking about the number of perpetrators and the number of therapists who are doing terrible things, and it's like built into us, right? Like, so many people after Deepak was known to be part of this whole Epstein, situation, were saying, well, I always felt that about him and I always thought that, but nobody said anything about it, right? And I think what doesn't get said allows a lot of damage, right? It allows a lot of pain. It creates a lot of pain, and it perpetuates a lot of pain. So I think if there's any core motivator, core drive in me is art is amazing because it is a space. It allows you to say what people don't want you to say. And I think pretty much everything I've ever written on some level has been saying something, at least a chunk of people don't want me to be saying, you know.
Yes, you've always been a risk taker. Can you talk about a big risk that you took and what you learned from the times where you faced failure?
Well, I think anytime I remember just the early days of doing the Vagina Monologues, come on, at here, the first night I ever did it at here, I just thought someone was going to shoot me. I was so scared. I was so scared. I don't think I've ever been so scared in my life. You know, I had already done a little bit at a Cornelia Street Cafe, but that was like a cafe, it was underground. And I think it was a very, very terrifying moment. It really felt like I was pushing through some really powerful taboo that could absolutely come back and get me. You know,
Right.
I didn't know what would happen. And that was one of those great moments where, you know, pushing through my fear and pushing through that ended up to be amazing. But there was another piece I did. It was called The Treatment, and it was during the whole terrible Iraqi situation where we were torturing Iraqis and torturing people. Remember Abu Ghraib and all those horrible
Yeah.
things were happening, and I did a piece about it, and it was in the moment it was happening, and people weren't ready to deal with it. It was too much in the moment. You know what I mean? And the production didn't work really. There was an actor problem. I mean, there were a lot of problems with it, but it was more just people just couldn't own what America was doing in that moment, and
Right.
and the audience really pushed back against it. I don't regret doing it, but it was a moment. And sometimes I think about, like, how do you write about this moment? It's something we really have to be thinking about as artists, particularly right now when we're living in an authoritarian country that's rapidly closing the gates on freedom
Yeah.
in every single respect and perpetuating enormous crimes here and abroad, and you know, and also revealing the crimes that have been perpetuated in terms of the Epstein files. So I think the work is to say, like, how do we write or act or perform into this moment, but how do you do it in a way where people can hear it and not shut down and not get angry and not get defensive and panic, you know? They taught me a lot, that failure.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's so complex in this time because we're so siloed,
Yeah.
and you're in a lot of ways in the arts, you speak to the people who are already in your camp, the preaching to the choir issue. But there's an expansion of thinking that can start to happen. But I worry right now in this moment with the separations that are happening that it's harder and harder for us to cross those aisles and be able to affect people's hearts and minds, because people don't even come any longer if they don't think they're going to agree with it.
Well, also in New York, theaters become so prohibited in terms of costs that
Yes,
it's
absolutely.
really become something for the elite classes, right? And we just did this kind of musical uprising that we created called Dear Everything on climate change, which is youth driven.
We want you to panic. We want you to act. You stole our future and we want it. We want it back.
I wrote the book and some of the lyrics, but Justin Tranter and Carolyn Pinnell and Diane Paulus directed it. And we just took it around the country. And we were able to do it in a way where I got a benefactor in every city to essentially put the play on so that we could give tickets to 90% of the people for free. So we were
Amazing.
able to bring farmers and workers and union members and students and all these people who'd never been to the theater before and who were interested in the earth and the climate and the youth and the whatever. And it was radicalizing for them. And, you know, every theater was like a 1,700, 2,000 seat theater. So, you know, we reached a lot of people on that tour. And we gave $20,000 away to every city, to all the climate change groups. and we had all these climate
Amazing.
activists come up from each community and talk at the end of the show. So we were really creating a new way of doing theater in this time, and we reached so many people who were not of the same mind. People who walked out of the theater going, wow, thank you, this really, oh, this got me thinking, or I hadn't thought about that, or so I think it's all about, to be honest, about money. I think it's all
Uh-huh.
about money, because people don't come to theater because they can't afford it. And that goes for
Right.
regional theater too. Working class people can't afford $50 a ticket or $70.
Plus the babysitter,
Exactly. That's a
Yeah.
lot of money, you know? But when they were invited for free, and when they could bring their kids, when they could bring a group of people, oh my God, they were so excited. So if obviously if we had a government that believed in the arts, and and supplemented them, and so that people could come, so that people could be changed by culture, that would be amazing. you know.
Yeah. That's fascinating. I think that our field right now is kind of in free fall because of all of the changes to the funding structures, because of all of the unfriendliness, to say the least, from the Trump administration towards the arts. It's a really incredibly precipitous moment for the arts. And I'm interested in this model that you're suggesting of these collaborations between private funders, theaters, community organizations organized around issues.
Kristen. And I
I
really,
think,
yeah. And let me just say that um, I think everything that's happening is horrific, but it wasn't working anyway. Let's be real. It
that's
wasn't
right.
working anyway for anybody, for artists, for audience. It was
Yep.
working for some elite people who got to go see Broadway, which is primarily nostalgia, right? I mean,
Right.
we're not talking
Yes.
about radical works being produced on Broadway. Broad is
Right.
the operative phrase, right? So I think this time is asking us to not just create new art, is to create new um, systems of delivering the art, and how we deliver art, because that is that is the political parallel to the art we're making. And I think for so long we have delivery systems that are so capitalist and so at odds with what we're doing. Like in the Here days, people could come see it. People could afford it. People could just come into the theater and feel like, oh my God, this is happening. This is so exciting. You know, that's gone. That's gone. Even if here things are expensive,
Yes.
we
Yes, it's true.
and so people then begin to see the theater as something for rich people, or something for smart people, or something for educated people, or something for people who aren't me, and who don't have to work all their lives. And I think if we were smart, we would use this time to really begin to imagine different delivery systems, different ways to
Yes.
bring theater to people. And let me tell you something, all of those funders who hosted those cities, they were introduced, they got to come up. This is my offering to the city. I'm giving this to you. And people were so appreciative of them, and they felt so good about it, every city we went to. And I think you can do that if you put your mind to doing it, right? And then you find people in climate change, or if you're working in LGBTQ issues, or you're working in immigration, or whatever you're working in, go to the people interested in that and say, I've got this play. Will you host a city? Will you host a city? And I think, we're going to do it at BAM in April for one big night. Jane Fonda is going to be the narrator. But then we hope we're going to do a whole new tour, with
Fantastic.
and I don't know, I think it's exciting. Obviously, it's horrible, all the shutting down of speech and the desecration of DEI and the erasure of all the civil rights and women's rights and LGBT. It's horrific. But there is an upside, which is, as a woman said last night in this child immigration meeting that we had, all these beautiful people from a wonderful agency called the Young Center came, and they talked about what's happening to children right now in America. And it was horrific, but they also were telling us what we could do. And Maria Linajosa was there, who's this wonderful Mexican journalist who's been covering, immigration since she was born. She said, I'm sitting in a room of a whole bunch of people who've never asked about immigration ever before. So we're actually thinking about this issue where we haven't been thinking about it before. And we have an opportunity now to remake the whole systems So this doesn't get to happen again, you know?
Yes.
And I think that's just something to think about. Like there is an
It,
upside.
it is a really inspirational perspective. Thank you. And is there any other suggestion that you would make for institutions in this time of ways they could change to better serve the communities that they live in and work in?
I think one of the things people could do is invite people into their theaters, working people, farmers, union people, all the people that exist. You look at Minnesota, the faith community, the unions, the doctors and nurses, to invite people in and say to them, why don't you go to the theater? What would theater be like for you? What would you like to see in the theater? What would begin to work with real people to find out what they're interested in, to find out what they care about. I think sometimes we make up this idea of an audience that isn't necessarily based in the grassroots with the people, right? And then we start communicating to ourselves and we all dig each other and all that's great, but we leave out, I really felt this in America when I traveled. I was like, oh my God, like people didn't come to the theater. Like all of these people were never here. So what they felt is left out. They felt they weren't cared for. They felt they didn't matter. They didn't have value. And I think what we have to do is think, who are we making theater for? Who are the people who need the most support, the most energizing, the most to lift up their stories that aren't being told, to bring them into the story so that when elections happen, they don't fall for someone like, the orange creature again, right? They don't turn to him thinking that whatever lies he's perpetuating are somehow about them because they've been included in the story that we're creating.
Mark Bamoudi Joseph recently asked, how do we create the conditions for artists to guide us forward to the other side of fear? Do you agree that artists are where we can find that? Or do you think it's in the people that you were talking about, or a combination
I
of
think it's
both?
a combination. I think it's a combination, but I think what I would love to see artists doing more is addressing what they're afraid of. Addressing, again, saying the unsayable of like dealing with dealing with the complexity of issues, dealing with writing into things that you're not supposed to talk about, writing into things that people would like to keep under the, I mean, right now we're in the process, for example, of adapting the apology to be a play, right? Which is the book I wrote, the apology I wrote for my father to me for sexually abusing and beating me. And it's very graphic and it's very specific. And it's his very in detailed apology in steps that were powerful and it's painful and it's scary. And in the book, we've never heard a man line up and detail an account of his pedophilia, of why he did it, of all the things he did in detail, him saying it. We've never seen that before in human history. It's never happened. Never. We have never heard a man ever tell what he did to a girl. So it's very radical. And to be honest with you, it feels, even when we're in the rehearsal room, like it's scary. You can feel we're going through something that is going to be explosive when it happens. To me, that is the most exciting art. That is the most exciting art. When half the people are going, this is amazing, and I'm not sure you should be doing this, right? That is when you know you're onto something. And we can't keep playing it safe. We can't keep appeasing and making audiences feel like everything's okay. Everything's not okay. Everything's not okay. Everything right now, we need people activated. We need people awoken. We need people like what can I do every minute of every day until we have saved this country, you know? Like we can't go on as business as usual. And art is the thing that catalyzes that, or can, if people are willing to be bold, right?
And is that why you chose art as your mode of resistance rather than politics or something different?
I don't separate them. Audrey and Rich once said that the moment a feeling enters the body is political. And I think I think everything we do is political. Everything we do. If we choose to write a play where everybody's happy, that's political. If we choose to write a play where people confront things, that's political. But what happens in this culture is what gets defined as political is anything that is left. You know, if you go to a Broadway play that keeps you completely in la la land and doesn't wake you up and doesn't make you miserable, that is keeping you in line with the system, which is tending to the right, right? But we don't define that as that. We define things that wake you up or disturb you or as leftists, but in fact, as political. But in fact, what people are saying is they want you to pay attention to systems that may be not only destroying you, but every fabric of iota of this world around us, right? So I don't think I've ever, I mean, when people always do this activist artist thing, I'm always like, every every person who writes, like that whole thing that just happened at the Berliner, where you know
Yeah.
when Wim Wenders came out and said art isn't political, and Arundhati, who's a dear friend of mine, was like, "What are you talking about? All art is political. What are you saying? You know, it's only political if you don't want to talk about something. If you don't want to deal with Palestine. If you don't want to talk about Gaza. You know." So I think, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. How does your identity or lived experience inform the work that you make?
Well, I think it's impossible to separate one's own experience from the work, you know, and for me, because so much of my work comes from kind of an emotional center, right? I mean, I think what I really care about is how do we transmit feel. That's why I like monologues so much, that it's like compacted emotional transmission, right? It's the highest it's the highest way. It's the high capacity of transmitting emotional intensity into people. And to me, that is where people wake up. Is when that emotional thing happens inside of you where you're like, oh, yeah, okay, something's happening. So um, I think I think that is really of great interest to me in everything I do. And that is obviously based on my own emotional mandala and system that was created by others and has been recreated by me, right? And so I trust my own experience, but I also do enormous amount of research on anything I do. I read a lot of books because it's kind of the combination of that emotional thing with, okay, idea, thought, history, piece, all kind of coming together, you know.
How do you balance experimentation with your craft?
That's such a good question. It's such a good question because I think sometimes you sometimes things come to me in as a form, right? When I wrote the book In the Body of the World, after I had cancer and I was in the process of opening the City of Joy in Congo, I just kept thinking, what is the form of this book? And one day I was in line to buy something at a deli, and I went, oh, scans. Like I had so many MRI scans, right? They push you under and it would be a scan. I said, I'll do the book in scans. It'll be like scan, boom, image, scan. And the minute I got that, I knew how to write the book. I knew how to do it. It was like, oh, okay, there it is, there it is, there it is. And I knew it had to be like these short chapters, like, because that's how it was all coming to me. Because I was also there were so many emotions going on that I could only tolerate thoughts in certain chunks. You know what I mean? So it just fit absolutely the story I was telling, you know? And when that happens, it feels so glorious. Like when the form comes, sometimes for me, when the form comes, I absolutely know how to write it, you know? When the form doesn't come, then it's like you start with a character, or you start with a situation, or you start with a story, right? But to me, the form is really, really important because it also talks about the cadence and the language and the rhythms and how you're going to really reveal that story, you know.
Could you share a moment of pure joy in your art making?
God, there's been so many. You know, I think I mean, I'll just pick this one because it was at here and it was such a special experience when we did Extraordinary Measures for Paul Walker. I think there was something about losing Paul that was so devastating because he was such a dear friend and a director of my work and such a beautiful, original. I think about him every day. I just can't believe he didn't get to live into this time because he would have made magic here, you know. But to be able to have gone through the whole death experience with Paul, and then to be able to write a piece where my dear, dear friend Celeste Lacine got to play all those characters to honor him, to celebrate him, to make the kind of wild, strange, beautiful story of his life in a very short period after he had died, to give everyone in that community a way to mourn and grieve all the beautiful people we were losing from AIDS at that time and the horrible, horrible grief we were all going through. There was so much joy in that. There was so much joy because it brought so many people together in community, and it was honoring of Paul, and it felt like we had him linger with us, and his magic was with us, and it was oddly very joyful, even though there was so much grief involved, because I think grief really is love, and there was so much love in that experience, you know.
Yeah, that's an example of a work impacting a community, and that's so much a part of the work that you make. Can you talk about how community informs your work and how you dive into engaging with the community that you might not have already been working with, but it becomes important and core to you? Yeah.
I think for me, community is always the partner in the work, always the partner. I can't think of a play I've done, whether it was about the Vagina Monologues and all the women I interviewed, who then I obviously turned into fictional monologues, but that community was behind all those pieces that eventually came to be, or whether it was homeless women who I spent 8 years with at the Oliveri shelter on 30th Street, or whether it was women in New Orleans who I work with when we created Swimming Upstream, or whether it was the women in prison, or was it, you know, they're always communities. Or I just finished a new piece that NAMI, the National Mental Health Alliance, commissioned me to write on mental illness. And I didn't base it on interviews, but I spent a lot of time reading a lot of books and talking actually to a lot of therapists to get the idea of what were the issues that were burning in them. And then I could go, okay, I'm going to go back and remember somebody from the homeless shelter, and I'm going to be good. And so I just kind of, called up people who've lived in me and who live in me, or parts of me, or, in my own psyche, to create that piece for the mental health community. And now NAMI is using it as their tool to talk about issues, right? So
That's beautiful.
it's wonderful. So I feel like, or Dear Everything, which is about climate change, or In the Body of the World, which was about cancer, and then the whole cancer community was part of that, or I did a piece during COVID called That Kindness, where I interviewed all these nurses, and then I put a piece together for them that we did, on Zooms all around the country at theaters, So it's like, how do we support communities? How do we reflect them? How do we share and then there's the pieces where I just wrote to help people in their own communities write their plays that they could perform,
Yeah, you're talking a lot about collaboration also. What for you makes like a healthy and productive collaboration, whether it's between you and communities or you and your collaborating artists like Diane as your director and your composer, talk about
To
that.
me, the best room to be in is where everybody in that room is part of the creation. That's number one. And they're valued. And they're valued. Like those insights, or those questions, or those, whatever people are offering, are listened to and valued. Now, you may not take all the suggestions, and it may not work for you, but I think the also thing is like, who's gonna call you on your stuff? Who's gonna say, you're not looking at this, or are you aware that if you said this, it would mean this to Black people, or you said this, it would mean this to gay people, or trans people wouldn't feel good about that, or how would I think you want people in the room who are going to keep opening the aperture of liberation, right? Keep opening the aperture of liberation, so that you don't necessarily just write woke material, but whatever you're writing, you're aware of why you're doing it, what you're saying, and what the dialectics you're creating in that work to create more of a kind of higher intelligence or a higher understanding in the work.
That's really inspirational. How do you balance creating on that level with leading V-Day and 1 Billion Rising? How do you make
Really
your own
hard.
work
Yeah.
and then still do the movement building that you've been doing? Yeah.
I think the hardest part of that was when in the years when we had to raise money, that a lot of my time was just being drained by raising money. And it was really taking me away from being able to create. And at a certain point, a board member said, they just did an amazing thing where they said, we're going to fund you. We're just going to fund you. And they just started funding us and giving us the bulk of what we needed every year.
Incredible.
That was after 15 years. 15
Yeah.
years. And
Yeah.
that was like the greatest liberation because I lived in Paris for 8 years, and it was ideal because I would get up in Paris and I would work from 8 to 1, and then New York would wake up and I would do V-Day for the rest of the day. And it was perfect, you know? It was like the perfect lifestyle. But now I feel like I have my days divided. Like I work from 8 to 1 or 2, and then the rest of the day I do movement stuff, you know, and it works out fine. And they inspire each other. They bounce off each other. They speak to each other, you know?
How have institutions supported or not supported your work?
Oh, me. You know, I think it has not been an easy road. I mean, the irony of my life is that I've been very blessed to say that just about everything I've written has gotten produced. It has not been a road that is straight and easy, right? It's been, I always say this to artists, real artists. You don't just have to create your road, your art. You have to create the road to get your art into the world. There's no one who's going to create that for you, you know, and that's unfortunate because it takes a lot of work, and it would be great if people had that road that they could just go out and do. But I haven't done anything in my life that I didn't have to create the road for, you know. I had a period of time when ART and, you know, and it was a gift that Diane Pauls gave me. She just said, why don't you just come and be playwright in residence here and we'll do your work. And so I had a really long run there of 10 years where they were just doing my work. And that was late into my life, my dear. That was in my 60s, right? When that happened. The first home. I think here was my home too. I think I did a lot of work at here. Here was my home. And then there were individual producers who came into my life who believed in my work, who would say, what are you doing next? Or what do you want to do next? So I've always kind of had these benefactors, or people who really believed in what I was doing, who would step up to put money into my work. You know, usually, to be honest, usually women who really, really believed in me. You know what I mean? But, you know, I had to nurture that and develop that and go out and make that happen to some degree. And I think if I have anything to say to young artists, it's like, invent your way. Invent your way. You know, until we are living in a world where we have a kind of national or governmental or situation where there's a pot of money for artists, right?
Yeah.
To really be influencing the culture, to be expanding our consciousness and changing our vision. And until that happens, it's really find the people who believe in you, who have money, and nurture them and develop them and work with them, you know, so that they keep with you on your journey, right? I've been very fortunate in having incredibly generous people support my work, but not institutions. Mm-mm.
Okay. What do you hope to leave behind for that next generation of upcoming theater makers?
That it's possible. That it's possible. That if I could go out and, you know, when the Vagina Monologues happened, I was already a way downtown playwright, right? And I thought to myself, am I really going to write a play now about vaginas, right? That's going to secure my downtown status forever, right? That will be it. Like I'll be done, right? But it was also so interesting to me that I couldn't stop it. I really just, I really cared. I really cared what was happening to women's bodies. I really cared. And I just decided, like, that is what's going to drive me. I can't write about things I don't care about. I can't do it. It just doesn't interest me. Nothing comes, right? So part of it is to listen and to hear what that thing is that's pulsing through you. What are you raging about? What do you need to say? What do you need to break through? What do you need to help people with? What do you need to lift up? What do you have to do? And then to follow that and not hold back and not limit yourself, and to trust that if you do that and you do it well, people will always respond to it, because people respond to authenticity more than anything. When you walk into a theater and you see somebody doing something you've never seen before, and you know it's coming from their guts and their heart and their body and their brain, and they had to tell the story, they could not but tell that story, you know it the minute it begins. And you're there, and you'll do anything to support it, because when that happens, it's magic, right? So to trust it and to not whine. Just cut the whining. I mean, I think it's like, I was making $18,000 when I was in my 40s. I was doing the work in theaters where I was making no money, right? What were we making? We were making nothing, right? But I took odd jobs. I did what I could to survive. And I had a crazy experience where this play called the Vagina Monologues suddenly became this phenomena. Did I think that would happen? Absolutely not. It surprised me as much as everybody, but I believe it happened because it came out of my true desire to tell those stories in a way that would help women be free. And I think that's what you got to check in. What's the intention? What's the thing driving it? What's the spiritual, artistic intention at the core of the work you are doing? Like, to know that, because it can't just be, oh, I'll throw something out and see if it sticks to the wall, or try this. Like, you can, but audiences can feel when an author is compelled to tell a story, when an author has to say something, when you can feel it. You can feel it. It's in the language, it's in the energy, it's in what's being said on stage.
So that's in the core of your practice. Are there ways that your practice has changed or evolved as you've aged or responded to the world around you?
Well, I think every play is different, right? I think everything you write is a different journey. It takes you, like, I'm writing a play now that I've been writing really for 10 years, and it's finally happened. And I couldn't find the form of it, and I knew what I wanted the play to be about, but I couldn't find the form, and the characters kept changing, and then finally, because of this current administration and the time we're living in, suddenly the energy started to come in for the play, and then everything began to show me a way that I could do this, right? So I think everything's really dependent on what the material is, right? I don't know. I mean, I think there's some tricks you always go back to because they work, and there's ways sometimes I don't trust that, and I want to push myself to go further and not rely on what I've always done, to try something new.
That's amazing. How do you define success as an artist now, and has that definition evolved?
I think my biggest definition of success is that you are able to continue creating, that you are able to keep making work, whatever the outside world is saying, that you in your heart and soul are able to keep making work. That's number one. I think when I was younger, to be honest with you, I was a very split person in that I was doing radical work but wanted commercial attention, right? And I think that's true with a lot of people downtown. Like, I had a therapist once who said to me, well, do you want to write Broadway plays? Go write a Broadway play. And I was like, no. And then he was like, well, shut up, like, do the work you're doing, right? But because we're also programmed in this capitalist culture that we don't believe we have value unless we have these certain measurements or awards or reviews or things that we're told in the culture, we get pulled into that in spite of ourselves, right? And the world's always judging you. Let's face it. You do 3 shows and you don't get good reviews, you're not going to keep getting plays done. That's just, or if no one comes, you're not going to keep getting plays done. So you have to be aware to some degree of the world around you to keep, and I think a measure of success for me is, I feel so blessed to go around the world and have people come up to me everywhere to say, I did your show, the Vagina Monologues, when I was, 17 years old at this college. I did it here, I did it here, I did it here, and this is what happened to me. Or I saw this. It's when you hear what work has done for people, how it's changed them, how it's ignited them, how it took them in different directions, how it made them know they weren't alone. Whatever it was, that to me is success.
And what would make like a truly sustainable life for an artist today? What do you think is needed to make that happen? What would it look like?
Well, first of all, we'd have to live in a culture that believed in art and understood that art is as important as eating, right? That it should be like health, food, good environment, water, and art, right? And enough money to survive. And I think when you live in a culture that devalues art, that doesn't understand what art is here, it's very hard to keep working in that void. It's very painful. So one, to have an environment that embraced artists and encouraged artists and had your back. We live in a culture where if you write 2 great plays and your third one flops, you're done. You're erased. You're canceled. What is that? An artist, your life is an artist. You have an expanse of your life, and you'll write plays that are great, and you'll write plays that are, it's not even not so good, that doesn't hit the culture at the right moment, that doesn't come in at a time when the culture can handle it. And 10 years later, the play gets done and people are like, amazing. So we have to embrace the life of an artist, not just the one-off events. And, we do that to everything in this culture. It's like itemize it. And, if you're good at this, great. But if you're done, then you're finished. As opposed to, no, let's nurture that artist. Let's let him try this and let her try that and let her do this and let her do this. And let's see the expanse of the work without punishing them for anything that doesn't make it in the culture. Because that's how you devastate artists. That's how you undo them, right? You make them feel like failures. You make them, look what happened to Tennessee Williams at the end of his life. We can go through so many great artists who were destroyed by the end of their lives, right? Why? They were putting their hearts on the line. They were putting their vulnerability on the line. They were putting their whole beings on the line. And we're going to hurt them as opposed to the people who are raping children, right? Those are the people we're going to hurt, right? We have it completely ass backwards in this culture. Completely ass backwards. Those that are generous and artful and vulnerable and trying to wrestle with things and tackle things. Okay, we may not get it right all the time. We may spend 5 years in a room and come up with something that doesn't work, but we're trying. We've got to value that and honor that and love people for that trying. And we have nowhere near that culture. We have the opposite.
Yeah. I always say the challenge of the arts is that we never make the same thing twice.
Yeah.
So we are finding what it is. We're not making widgets.
That's right.
We are making something that is completely unique every single time.
Exactly.
And with different people in a process to create something that's never existed before. It's incredibly challenging.
It's incredibly challenging. And sometimes by the miracle of the goddesses and the mothers, you just fly through, and other times you just cannot find it. And the struggle of both cases is critical. It's all the struggle, all the work, it's just part of the amazing story of evolving your own career and your own life to try to keep getting to higher, deeper, more expansive places in your work. And if the culture keeps canceling you, when you don't get it right? We're so vicious to artists. The way people talk about writers and actors and producers, we're just, it's shocking to me. It's shocking to me.
Ayagawa, I interviewed her a couple of episodes ago, and they made a piece. It was pretty early career, and a critic called it a failure multiple times in the review, and it was completely devastating.
It made me really consider what failure meant to me.
Yeah.
And I felt like I couldn't do it alone. I enlisted the help of many different collaborators, actor collaborators, other writers, designers, and posed the same question, like, what is failure? Tell me a failure story. What do you consider failure to be?
They were talking about how we only talk about failure as a road to success. We don't talk about failure and what it means to sit in it yourself, you know? It was very interesting to think about how we squander the risks that artists take and the danger that they put into their work with the capitalist quick take. Yeah.
I had a really interesting thing happen to me once, back in the days when I cared about the New York Times. And, it was just the most, and it was kind of the end of that because it happened in 1 week. In 1 week, and I'm not saying this to show off, I'm just showing this to say how absolutely elusive and illusionary
and absurd the press is.
the beginning of the week, I'd probably written the most important play of the decade, most political, and at the end of the week, I'd written the worst play ever, right? Okay, I had a play open, and it was the same week. It was the same week, and the level of my devastation, I can't even tell you.
Yeah.
And I realized right then that take that devastation, take it in, look at it, look at you in relationship to what do you want, who are you, why are you doing what you're doing, and put that into your next play. Like put that into your next play, right? Like what do you want to do now? Like with that. Is there a character? Is there a capitalist character that's hungry for this and that, and it became, and it transformed it for me. And now I feel like, reviews are just opinions. Reviews are just somebody who may or may not be in your realm and you're maybe having a bad day, maybe so outside the realm of what you're working, who knows? It's just one person. And I'm glad in a way that the Times has fallen. I'm glad that one opinion that used to cancel a play overnight. It was horrible. It was a horrible notion. It was like the big daddy coming in and going, no, you don't get to exist, right? It was that hierarchy, that patriarchy, that thing that we all were up against, as opposed to let's have an array of people with opinions. Like that's one of the great things about London. You have like 8 papers that come out and there's many, many reviews and it's fantastic. And people go to everything anyway. They just go and see it because they're interested in what's happening. And I think there's something about being led by one opinion or being corralled, into this notion that, one thought or one reaction to something is the determinant of it, If art is worth its salt, it will create many reactions. Right? There will be people who love it and there'll be people who hate it and there'll be people. That's what art should be doing.
It should.
Yeah.
It should trigger. It should elicit response.
Yeah.
It should make people uncomfortable, make them laugh, all of the
Make them
range.
pissed
Yeah.
off, make them excited, and make them. It's dangerous. We need to make art dangerous.
Is there anything that we haven't talked about that is important to you to share in this context?
Just that I feel we need artists right now more than we've ever needed them. I think I can't underestimate what dangerous times we're living in right now, and how close we are to absolutely losing everything this country could have been. Right? I'm not going to say was, because it's never been. It's never been a non-white supremacist, non-racist, non-capitalist, non-misogynist, non-hateful of LGBTQ. It's always been. But we were working hard to change it. And we were beginning to have progress. We really were. I mean, from all the DEI programs to all the ways feminists had changed we're really changing consciousness, to the fact that we had a real transgender movement and things were beginning to open up. Things were beginning to happen in a very, very, really exciting way. And this pushback is absolutely as a result of it. But we can't falter now. We have to keep going forward. And we have to, I really feel this, like, emergency is an amazing word, because emerge is in the middle of it, you know? And we're in an emergency right now. And emergencies call for artists to help us find our way to the emerge part. You know, that's what they help us do. They help us emerge through the emergency. And that means we need all hands on deck. We need every artist writing the music that will help us through, writing the theater, doing the dance, making the paintings, doing whatever form your art is taking. You need to be creating about this moment, in this moment, so people can get free. And people can actually evolve the world that is dying to be born in this moment. That's what we need to be doing now. And whoever you are, just go out and do it where you can do it, and find your benefactors and find the people who will help you do it. But be bold and be dangerous and be daring and be loving and really be part of creating this new world that will emerge in the midst of this darkness if enough of us participate.
Thank you so much for that inspiration. We all need inspiration right now, V. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Kristen, for always being on the front lines of original, uncompromising, new, outrageous, and really, really powerful art. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this with us. Thanks to our audience out there for joining us, and to HowlRound for hosting. Come back for more of Torches.